My name is Amelia Chen, and for most of my adult life, I was a master of invisibility. Not the superhero kind, though, God knows, I wished for that power more times than I can count, but the kind that comes from years of perfecting the art of taking up as little space as possible. I worked as a botanist at the Dallas Research Institute, a gleaming building filled with brilliant minds and ambitious hearts. My colleagues were the kind of people who attended conferences in exotic locations, who gave TED Talks about saving the planet, who had Wikipedia pages and blue check marks on social media. I was the one who made sure their plants didn't die while they were busy being important. Don't get me wrong, I loved my work. There's something profoundly peaceful about the silent conversations you have with living things. Plants don't judge you for eating lunch alone every day. They don't whisper about why you never talk about weekend plans or why you flinch when someone mentions setting you up with their cousin's friend's brother. I had my tiny office tucked away in the basement, surrounded by grow lights and humidity sensors, and I was content. Or at least I thought I was. The night everything changed, I was doing what I did most Tuesday nights, working late because my apartment felt too quiet, too empty, too much like a museum of one person's carefully curated loneliness. I've been documenting the growth patterns of a particularly stubborn orchid species for 3 months, and something about the way the light caught its petals had me completely absorbed. By the time I looked up, the building was empty. Security had probably done their rounds without me noticing. My stomach growled, reminding me that a granola bar at 3 p.m. didn't constitute a proper meal. So I gathered my things and headed out into the humid Dallas night. The 7-Eleven was one of those fluorescent bright islands in the urban darkness, the kind of place where insomniacs and third-shift workers cross paths without making eye contact. I was standing in the refrigerated section, contemplating the profound sadness of a microwave burrito when I heard a voice behind me. You gonna name that plant or just stare at it all night? I turned around, and there she was. Kira Delacola, though, I wouldn't learn her name for another 10 minutes, leaning against the candy aisle with a confidence that seemed to bend reality around her. She was tall, probably 5'8" to my 5'4", with short dark hair that looked like she'd run her fingers through it and tattoos peeking out from under a worn leather jacket. But it was her eyes that stopped me, cold deep brown, almost black, with crow's feet that suggested she laughed often and genuinely. "I'm sorry," I managed, my voice coming out as barely more than a whisper. She nodded toward the small succulent I'd been absent-mindedly holding, the plant. "You've been holding it for like 5 minutes, just staring at it. I was starting to think you were having some kind of mystical experience." Heat flooded my cheeks. "Oh, I'm a botanist." I was just, it's a Haworthia fasciata, and the growth pattern is interesting because a botanist. She stepped closer, and I caught a whiff of her scent, something warm and complex, like vanilla mixed with motor oil and something indefinably her. That's sexy as hell. I'm pretty sure I made a sound like a deflating balloon. "I'm Kira," she said, extending a hand. "Entomologist." "I study bugs." "Amelia," I squeaked, shaking her hand. Her skin was warm, slightly rough, with calluses that spoke of hands that weren't afraid of real work. "So, Amelia the botanist," she said, and the way she said my name made it sound like something precious. "What brings you to the fluorescent palace of processed foods at midnight?" I was working late, and I gestured vaguely at my rumpled clothes, my messy bun, the general disaster that was my appearance. "I don't really cook much." "Neither do I," she said, grinning. "But I know a place that serves decent tacos until 2 a.m. You interested?" I should have said no. I should have made some excuse about early meetings and responsibility. I should have done what I always did, retreat to my safe, quiet world where no one asked uncomfortable questions or made me feel like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Instead, I heard myself say, I love tacos. Her smile could have powered the city grid. Kira's truck was exactly what I expected, a battered pickup with a toolkit in the back, and indie rock playing softly on the radio. What I didn't expect was how natural it felt to slide into the passenger seat, or how easy it was to talk to her once my initial panic subsided. So, botanist, she said as we drove through the empty streets, what's your specialty? Roses? Fruit trees? Please tell me you're not one of those people who's obsessed with grass. I laughed, actually laughed for the first time in weeks. Endangered species recovery, mostly. I work with plants that are on the verge of extinction, trying to figure out how to bring them back from the brink, like plant CPR. Something like that, though it's more like detective work, I guess. You have to understand what went wrong, what the plant needs to survive, and then create conditions that haven't existed in decades or sometimes centuries. She was quiet for a moment, and I worried I'd bored her. Then she said, that's beautiful. You're literally giving life back to the world. No one had ever described my work as beautiful before. Necessary, maybe. Important on a good day. But beautiful? I felt something crack open in my chest, a space I hadn't realized was there. The taco place was a tiny hole in the wall called Rosita's, with plastic chairs and a hand-painted sign that had seen better decades. Kira ordered in rapid Spanish, chatting with the owner like they were old friends, while I sat there trying to process the fact that I was on what might technically be classified as a date. So, she said, sliding into the seat across from me, tell me about the bugs in your plants. The bugs? Everything has bugs. That's one of the first things you learn in entomology. There's no such thing as a sterile environment in nature. Everything is connected. Everything is interacting. So what bugs live in your endangered plants? And just like that, we were off. I found myself talking about pollination relationships, about the tiny beetles that lived in certain flower petals, about the intricate web of dependencies that kept ecosystems functioning. She listened with the intensity of someone who genuinely cared, asking questions that showed she understood not just the science, but the poetry of it. I've got a theory, she said, stealing one of my French fries, that every plant has a perfect bug, and every bug has a perfect plant. Like soulmates, but with more evolutionary pressure. That single quote's ... actually not far from the truth, I admitted. Co-evolution is a real thing. Species developing together, adapting to each other over millions of years. See, science is just romance with better documentation. I nearly choked on my Coke. Did you just call evolution romantic? Baby, evolution is the ultimate love story. Two species meeting, changing each other, becoming something new together. If that's not romance, I don't know what is. The way she said baby made my stomach do things that definitely weren't scientific. We talked until the restaurant closed, and then we sat in her truck in the parking lot, talking some more. She told me about her research on native bee populations, about the way colony collapse disorder was affecting agricultural systems across Texas. I told her about my failed attempts at dating, about the loneliness that felt like a constant low-grade fever. You know what your problem is? She said, and I braced myself for the usual lecture about putting myself out there, about trying harder, about smiling more. You're looking for love in the wrong ecosystem. I'm sorry. You're trying to find your perfect match in an environment that doesn't support your growth. It's like trying to grow a rainforest orchid in a desert. The conditions are all wrong. She was right, of course. I've been trying to force myself into spaces where I didn't belong, with people who didn't understand the language I spoke. So what's my natural habitat? I asked. She leaned closer, and I could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. Somewhere quiet enough to hear yourself think. Somewhere with good light for growing things. somewhere with someone who appreciates. The kind of person who notices the small miracles. When she kissed me, it was soft and careful, like she was afraid I might scatter like dandelion seeds. I kissed her back, and it felt like coming home to a place I'd never been. The next few weeks passed in a blur of discovery. Kira had this way of making the ordinary feel extraordinary. Grocery shopping became an adventure. When she pointed out the tiny ecosystems in the produce section, explaining how certain fruits attracted specific insects, how the placement of organic versus conventional produce created different microclimates. I started staying later at work, not because I was hiding from my empty apartment, but because I was excited to text her about my daily discoveries. She'd send me photos of interesting beetles she'd found, and I'd respond with pictures of unusual plant growth patterns. We were conducting a courtship in the language of science, and it was the most romantic thing I'd ever experienced. Our first real date was at the Dallas World Aquarium. I'd been there dozens of times for research, but seeing it through Kira's eyes made it feel like an alien world. She pointed out insects I'd never noticed, explained the relationship between aquatic plants and the terrestrial ecosystems that supported them. "You see that?" she said, pointing to a small beetle skimming across the surface of a pond. "That's a whirligig beetle. They hunt in groups, creating these complex patterns on the water surface. Scientists think they're communicating through ripples, like a language, like a love song. The males create specific patterns to attract females. It's like if you could seduce someone with the perfect equation. I was falling for her, hard and fast and completely. Not just because she was beautiful, though she was, in a way that made me forget how to breathe, but because she saw the world the way I did. She understood that science wasn't just facts and figures, but a way of seeing the profound interconnectedness of everything. The first time she came to my apartment, I was terrified. My place was exactly what you'd expect from a botanist's hermit, plants everywhere. Books stacked in precarious towers. A kitchen that was clearly used more for propagating seedlings than cooking actual food. "Jesus, Amelia," she said, spinning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It's like a jungle in here. I love it." She wasn't just being polite. She spent 20 minutes examining my orchid collection, asking detailed questions about their care and growth patterns. When she found the small greenhouse I'd built in my spare bedroom, she looked at me like I'd shown her a hidden treasure. "This is incredible," she said, running her fingers along the leaves of a rare bromeliad. "You've created a perfect microclimate in here. The humidity, the light, the air circulation, it's like you've built a little piece of Costa Rica in Dallas." "It's nothing special," I mumbled, but she grabbed my hands and pulled me closer. "Are you kidding? This is magic. You've created life where it shouldn't be able to exist. You've bent the rules of nature through sheer force of will and scientific knowledge." When she kissed me among my plants, surrounded by the humid air and the soft sound of water dripping from misting systems, I felt like I was finally exactly where I belonged. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about my newfound happiness. I'd been invisible for so long that people had gotten used to thinking of me as essentially sexless, a safe, neutral presence who could be counted on not to cause waves or complications. The first sign of trouble came from Dr. Henderson, my supervisor, who'd always treated me with the kind of distant politeness reserved for useful but unremarkable employees. I'd been working late one evening when he stopped by my office, ostensibly to check on my progress with the orchid project. "Amelia," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk with the air of someone preparing for an uncomfortable conversation. "I wanted to talk to you about maintaining professional boundaries." I looked up from my notes, confused. "I'm sorry, sir. I've noticed you've been distracted lately. Personal phone calls during work hours, leaving early, that sort of thing." My face heated. I had been texting Kira more during the day, and I had left early exactly twice to meet her for dinner. I don't think my productivity has suffered. If anything, I've been more focused lately. That's not really the point. He leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. The thing is, Amelia, this is a conservative institution. We depend on government funding, private donors, community support. Our reputation depends on maintaining certain standards. The word standards hit me like a physical blow. I knew exactly what he meant, even though he was too cowardly to say it directly. Dr. Henderson, I don't think my personal life. Your personal life becomes our business when it affects our funding. When board members start asking questions about the kinds of people we employ. The conversation ended with what he called a friendly warning about the importance of discretion, but I knew it was anything but friendly. I sat in my office for a long time after he left, staring at my hands and feeling the familiar weight of invisibility settling over me like a lead blanket. I didn't tell Kira about the conversation right away. Part of me hoped it would just go away, that I could find a way to be happy without rocking the boat. But Kira noticed my mood immediately. What's wrong? She asked that night as we sat on her couch, my head on her shoulder while she absently played with my hair. Nothing, just work stuff. Bullshit. You get this little wrinkle between your eyebrows when you're worried about something. Talk to me. So I told her. About Henderson. About his veiled threats. About the way he'd made me feel like my happiness was somehow shameful or dangerous. Kira was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then she said, "You know what pisses me off most about people like him?" "What?" "They act like love is something to be ashamed of. Like the fact that you're happy, that you're finally living authentically is somehow a threat to their little world of careful pretense." She pulled back so she could look at me directly. "Amelia, I need you to understand something. You are not too much. You are not inappropriate. You are not a problem to be solved or a scandal to be contained. You are a brilliant, beautiful woman who deserves to be loved openly and without apology." I started crying then because no one had ever said anything like that to me before. Kira held me while I sobbed, all the years of hiding and diminishing, myself pouring out in a flood of tears. "What do I do?" I whispered. "You decide who you want to be," she said. "You decide whether you're going to let people like Henderson define your worth, or whether you're going to stand up and claim your right to exist as fully yourself." The next few weeks were a battle between my old instincts and my new resolve. Every morning, I'd wake up determined to be brave, to live authentically, to refuse to hide who I was. But then I'd get to work and feel the weight of all those careful, conservative gazes, and I'd find myself slipping back into invisibility. The turning point came during a staff meeting about the upcoming annual fundraiser. We were discussing the guest list, the presentation schedule, the usual politics of scientific funding, when Dr. Henderson made an offhand comment about maintaining our institutional image. "Of course," he said, "we'll want to make sure our representatives are appropriate for our donor base. People who understand the importance of traditional values and scientific integrity." He didn't look at me when he said it, but the message was clear. I felt something hot and bright flare in my chest, not just anger, but something deeper. A recognition that I had a choice to make, right here, right now. "Dr. Henderson," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "when you say traditional values, what exactly do you mean?" The room went quiet. Henderson's face reddened slightly. "I think you know what I mean, Amelia." "Actually, I don't. Because if you mean the traditional scientific values of observation, hypothesis, experimentation, and peer review, then I'm in complete agreement. But if you mean something else, if you mean that certain kinds of people are somehow incompatible with scientific integrity, then I think we need to have a more explicit conversation." I could feel my colleague's eyes on me, could sense the mixture of shock and discomfort rippling through the room. But I also felt something else, a kind of strength I'd never experienced before. My personal life has no bearing on my ability to do my job, I continued. I've published more papers this year than any other researcher in this department. My orchid recovery project is ahead of schedule and under budget. The quality of my work speaks for itself. Henderson's jaw tightened. Amelia, I think you're misunderstanding. No, I don't think I am. I stood up, gathering my notes. I think you're suggesting that my relationship with another woman somehow compromises my professional integrity. And I think that's not only wrong, but illegal. I walked out of that meeting feeling like I'd shed an entire skin. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, but I felt more alive than I had in years. Kira was waiting in the parking lot when I got off work. She'd brought coffee and her laptop, claiming she had paperwork to catch up on, but I knew she was really there because she'd sensed I needed support. How did it go? She asked, looking up from her screen. I think I might have. Just torched my career, I said, sliding into the passenger seat. What happened? I told her about the meeting, about my small act of rebellion, about the way Henderson's face had looked when I challenged him directly. Jesus, Amelia, I'm so proud of you. Are you? Because I feel like I might throw up. She laughed, pulling me into a hug. That's just what courage feels like. You stood up for yourself, for us, for everyone who's ever been told they're too different to belong. That's fucking heroic. I might lose my job. You might, but you won't lose yourself. And honestly, any institution that doesn't value you doesn't deserve you. The fallout from the meeting was swift and predictable. Henderson called me into his office the next morning for what he termed a disciplinary conversation. I brought Dr. Sarah Martinez, a colleague who'd become an unexpected ally, as a witness. Amelia, Henderson began, his tone carefully neutral. Your behavior yesterday was inappropriate and disruptive. I'm afraid I have no choice but to place you on administrative leave pending a full review of your conduct. What conduct specifically? Dr. Martinez asked before I could respond. Defending her right to equal treatment? Challenging discriminatory language? I was in that meeting, Dr. Henderson, and I didn't hear anything that warranted disciplinary action. Henderson's face reddened. Dr. Martinez, I don't think you understand the full situation. I understand perfectly, she said calmly. I understand that you're retaliating against Dr. Chen for refusing to hide her sexual orientation. I also understand that this institution has very clear policies about discrimination and harassment. The meeting ended with Henderson backing down, but the damage was done. I could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the way conversation stopped. When I entered rooms, the careful distance my colleagues maintained. But something unexpected happened too. Dr. Martinez wasn't the only one who'd been paying attention. Dr. James Wong, the department head, scheduled a meeting with me 3 days later. Amelia, he said, settling behind his desk, I wanted to talk to you about the Morrison Grant. The Morrison Grant was a prestigious research fellowship that funded 2 years of independent study. I dreamed of applying for it, but had never thought I was competitive enough. I've been reviewing your work, he continued, and I think you'd be an excellent candidate. Your orchid recovery project has caught some attention in the broader scientific community, and your approach to endangered species rehabilitation is innovative. I stared at him, confused. I don't understand. After what happened in the meeting, what happened in the meeting was that you demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and courage we should be encouraging in our researchers. You stood up for scientific principles and professional ethics. That's not something to be punished, it's something to be celebrated. He leaned forward, his expression growing more serious. Between you and me, Amelia, this department needs more people like you. People who are willing to challenge the status quo, who bring fresh perspectives to old problems. I'd like to recommend you for the Morrison Grant if you're interested. The Morrison Grant would mean 2 years of funding, my own research lab, and the freedom to pursue whatever projects I chose. It would also mean independence from Henderson's. Supervision. I'm very interested, I said. Good. Start working on your application, and Amelia. Don't let anyone convince you that being true to yourself is a liability. In science, authenticity is our greatest asset. With the Morrison Grant application to work on, I threw myself into my research with renewed passion. But it wasn't just the promise of professional freedom that energized me. It was the way Kira had become woven into every aspect of my life, including my work. She'd started joining me in the lab on weekends, bringing her own research while I tended to my plants. There was something magical about working in parallel, each of us absorbed in our own projects, but aware of the other's presence. She'd look up from her microscope to ask about pollination cycles, and I'd pause in my note-taking to watch her photograph a particularly interesting beetle specimen. You know what I love about this? She said one Saturday afternoon, gesturing between our workstations. What? We're both studying life. You're figuring out how to bring species back from extinction. I'm documenting the ones that are thriving in unexpected places. We're like two sides of the same coin. It was true. Her research focused on urban insect populations, the way certain species adapted to city environments while others struggled. My work was about recreation, about giving species a second chance at survival. Together, we were documenting both the resilience and fragility of life. I've been thinking, she said, closing her laptop and turning to face me fully. What if we collaborated on something? A joint project that looks at the relationship between endangered plants and their insect partners. The idea was brilliant. Many of the plants I worked with had co-evolved with specific insect species, and the decline of one often contributed to the decline of the other. But most conservation efforts focused on either plants or insects separately, not the relationships between them. That could work, I said, excitement building in my chest. We could develop a model for ecosystem restoration that accounts for both plant and insect needs simultaneously. Exactly. And if we could demonstrate that integrated approach, it might revolutionize how conservation work is done. We spent the next 3 hours sketching out ideas, building on each other's insights, creating something neither of us could have developed alone. By the time we left the lab, we had the framework for a research proposal that felt genuinely groundbreaking. That night, as we lay in bed in her apartment, I found myself thinking about the word partnership. I'd always understood it in professional terms: collaboration, mutual benefit, shared goals. But lying there with Kira's arm around me, her breath warm against my neck, I began to understand it in a deeper way. Partnership wasn't just about working together. It was about becoming more than the sum of your parts, about creating something new and beautiful and impossible to achieve alone. Kira, I said softly, I love you. I felt her smile against my shoulder. I love you too. It was the first time either of us had said it, and it felt like a small miracle. Not dramatic or earth-shattering, but quiet and certain and true. The Morrison Grant application consumed my life for the next 2 months. I'd never worked so hard on anything, never felt so invested in a single project. But it wasn't just about the grant, it was about proving to myself that I could be both openly gay and professionally successful, that I didn't have to choose between authenticity and achievement. Kira was incredibly supportive throughout the process, reading drafts, offering feedback, bringing me food when I forgot to eat. She also contributed to the research proposal we developed together, adding her expertise in urban entomology to my work on plant conservation. The night I submitted the application, we celebrated with takeout Chinese food and a bottle of wine that costs more than I usually spend on groceries in a week. I can't believe it's done, I said, curling up next to her on the couch. I can't believe how brilliant you are, she replied, kissing the top of my head. That proposal is going to change how people think about conservation work. Our proposal, I corrected. I couldn't have done it without you. That's what partners do. We make each other better. The word partners made my stomach flutter in the best possible way. We'd been using it more often lately, and each time it felt more natural, more true. 3 weeks later, I got the call. Dr. Wang delivered the news himself. Congratulations, Dr. Chen. The Morrison Grant Committee was extremely impressed with your proposal. They particularly praised your innovative approach to integrated ecosystem restoration. I sank into my desk chair, overwhelmed. I got it? You got it. 2 years of funding, starting in the fall. You'll have your own lab space, a research budget, and the freedom to pursue your work without departmental oversight. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at my plants and trying to process what had just happened. I'd done it. I'd gotten the grant, proven my worth, secured my future. And I'd done it without hiding who I was. I called Kira immediately. I got it, I said as soon as she answered. The grant? Oh my God, Amelia, I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you. Your research made the proposal so much stronger. Our research, she corrected, echoing my earlier words. We're a team. That night, she took me to dinner at the fanciest restaurant in Dallas, a place with cloth napkins and wine lists that required a sommelier to navigate. I felt out of place in my best dress and uncomfortable heels, but Kira looked at me like I was the most beautiful woman in the world. I have something for you, she said as we waited for dessert. She pulled out a small wrapped box, and my heart stopped. It was too small to be anything other than jewelry, and the way she was looking at me made my hands shake. It's not what you think, she said quickly, noticing my expression. I mean, it's not that I don't want... God, I'm handling this badly. She took a deep breath and started over. I got this for you because I wanted you to have something to remind you of what you've accomplished. You've been so brave, Amelia. You've stood up for yourself, pursued your dreams, refused to let anyone dim your light. I'm so proud to be with you. Inside the box was a delicate silver necklace with a small pendant, a tiny orchid, perfectly detailed, with a small bee resting on one of its petals. It's beautiful, I whispered. It's us, she said. Plant and insect working together, creating something beautiful. I started crying right there in the restaurant, not caring about the other diners or the waiter who kept hovering nervously nearby. Kira reached across the table and took my hand, and I felt like the luckiest person alive. The next year was a whirlwind of change. I moved into my new lab space, a bright, airy room with floor-to-ceiling windows and enough space for both my plant collection and Kira's insect research. We'd officially become research partners, with Kira taking a position as a visiting researcher, funded by my grant. Working together every day revealed new depths to both our relationship and our research. We developed a daily rhythm, arriving early, sharing coffee while we planned our experiments, working in comfortable silence or animated discussion depending on the day's needs. Our joint research was producing results that exceeded our wildest expectations. The integrated approach to conservation was proving more effective than either of us had hoped, and we were already being approached by other institutions interested in collaborating on similar projects. But it wasn't just our professional partnership that was thriving. Living and working together had deepened our relationship in ways I'd never expected. We'd learned each other's rhythms, quirks, and needs. Kira knew that I needed absolute quiet when I was analyzing data, and I knew that she did her best creative thinking while talking through problems out loud. We'd also become more involved in the broader LGBTQ plus community in Dallas. Kira had connected me with a group of queer scientists and academics, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged to something larger than myself. You know what I love most about us? Kira said one evening as we sat in our lab watching the sunset. Paint the windows golden. What? We found each other exactly when we needed to. You needed someone to see your worth, and I needed someone who understood that science and love aren't opposites. They're different ways of understanding the same beautiful complexity. She was right. We'd found each other at the perfect moment, when we were both ready to grow beyond who we'd been separately. I have something to tell you, I said, setting down my tablet and turning to face her fully. What? Dr. Martinez approached me yesterday. She said there's going to be an opening for a department head position next year, and she thinks I should apply. Kira's face lit up. That's amazing. Are you going to do it? I don't know. It would mean more administrative work, less time for research. But it would also mean I could help shape the department's culture, make sure other people don't go through what I went through. You'd be incredible at it, she said. You have this way of seeing the best in people, of bringing out their potential. Look what you did with our research partnership. You saw possibilities I never would have imagined. I couldn't have done any of this without you, I said. You made me brave. No, she said, moving closer. You were always brave. I just helped. You see it. Spring arrived early that year, filling our lab with the scent of blooming research specimens. We'd been working on a particularly challenging project trying to restore a native Texas wildflower that had been extinct in the wild. For over 50 years, the work required patience, precision, and a kind of faith in the possibility of resurrection. I was documenting the first successful germination when Kira came up behind me, wrapping her arms around my waist. Look at that, she said, peering over my shoulder at the tiny green shoots emerging from the soil. Life finding a way. It's beautiful, I said, leaning back against her. You know what else is beautiful? What? The way you look when you're working. You get this expression of complete focus, like you're having a conversation with the universe. I turned in her arms, studying her face. There was something different about her today, a nervous energy that seemed to be barely contained. Are you okay? I asked. I'm perfect, she said. Actually, I'm terrified, but in the best possible way. Before I could ask what she meant, she dropped to one knee right there in the lab, pulling out a small velvet box. Amelia Chen, she said, her voice shaking slightly. 2 years ago, you changed my life in a 7-Eleven at midnight. You showed me that love doesn't have to be complicated or dramatic. It can be quiet and steady and absolutely revolutionary. I started crying before she even opened the box. You've made me braver, smarter, more curious about the world. You've shown me that science and love are both ways of paying attention to the miraculous ordinariness of existence. I want to spend the rest of my life discovering things with you, building something beautiful together. She opened the box, revealing a ring that took my breath away. It was unique, a band of rose gold shaped like a vine with a small diamond, nestled among tiny leaves and what looked like a microscopic bee. Will you marry me? Yes, I said, the word coming out as barely more than a whisper. Yes, absolutely yes. She slipped the ring onto my finger with shaking hands, and then we were both crying and laughing and holding each other in the middle of our lab, surrounded by the evidence of our shared work and love. I love you, I said, kissing her through my tears. I love you too, she said against my lips. Forever. Planning a wedding while running a research lab turned out to be more complicated than either of us had anticipated. We wanted something small and intimate, but even a small wedding required decisions about flowers, food, music, and guest lists that seemed to multiply exponentially. We could just elope, Kira suggested one evening as we sat surrounded by bridal magazines and vendor catalogs. We could, I agreed, looking at the chaos we'd created on my coffee table, but I want our friends to be there. I want Dr. Martinez to see that the shy botanist she stood up for is getting married to the woman she loves. I want that too, Kira said. I want the whole world to see how proud I am to be your wife. The word wife still sent shivers through me. After years of feeling invisible, the idea that someone would claim me so publicly, so permanently, felt like a miracle. We settled on a ceremony in the botanical gardens, surrounded by the kinds of plants I'd spent my career studying. It felt appropriate beginning our married life in a place where science and beauty intersected, where careful cultivation created something extraordinary. The morning of the wedding, I woke up in my apartment alone for the last time. We'd decided to follow the tradition of not seeing each other before the ceremony, so Kira had spent the night at her sister's place. I made coffee and sat in my kitchen, surrounded by all the plants I'd be moving to our new apartment the following week. Dr. Martinez arrived at 9 to help me get ready. She'd become not just a colleague, but a true friend, someone who understood the significance of this day in ways that went beyond the personal. "How are you feeling?" she asked, helping me into my dress, a simple sheath in pale green that Kira had said made my eyes look like forest pools. "Nervous," I admitted. "Happy, but nervous. That's normal. You're about to stand up in front of everyone you care about and make promises about forever. That's worth being nervous about." She was right. The commitment we were making today wasn't just about love. It was about choosing to build a life together, to face whatever came next as a team. The ceremony was perfect in its simplicity. We'd written our own vows, and when it was my turn to speak, I looked at Kira standing therein. Her dress, a vintage lace number that had belonged to her grandmother, and felt my prepared words dissolve. "Kira," I said, my voice carrying across the garden, "you taught me that being seen isn't something to fear. You showed me that love isn't about hiding the parts of yourself that seem too different or too much. You made me brave enough to take up space in the world." I took a shaky breath, trying to find the right words for everything she'd given me. "I promise to keep growing with you, to keep discovering new things about the world and about each other. I promise to love you not just in the easy moments, but in the hard ones too. I promise to be your partner in science and in life, to build something beautiful and sustainable with you." When she spoke her vows, her voice was steady and clear. "Amelia, you are the most extraordinary person I know. You have this way of seeing the world that makes everything more beautiful, more meaningful. You taught me that love can be quiet and still be revolutionary, that the most important discoveries happen in the spaces between heartbeats." She reached out and took my hands, her thumb tracing over my engagement ring. "I promise to protect your gentle heart while celebrating your fierce mind. I promise to support your dreams and challenge you to dream bigger. I promise to love you exactly as you are while helping you become whoever you're meant to be." When we kissed, sealing our promises, I felt like I was floating. The applause from our friends and family seemed to come from very far away, muffled by the sound of my own heartbeat and the whisper of wind through the trees. We spent our honeymoon in Costa Rica, ostensibly for relaxation, but mostly because we couldn't resist the opportunity to study tropical ecosystems together. It was peak rainy season, which meant fewer tourists and more opportunities to observe the intricate relationships between plants and insects that thrived in the humid climate. Our third day there, we were hiking through a cloud forest when I spotted something that made me stop dead in my tracks. "Kira," I whispered, grabbing her arm. "Look." Growing from the trunk of a massive cecropia tree was an orchid I'd never seen before. It was small, delicate, with petals that seemed to shimmer with an internal light. But what made it extraordinary wasn't just its beauty, it was the way it was glowing, actually emitting a soft blue-green light. Holy shit, Kira breathed. Is that bioluminescence? It can't be, I said, but even as I spoke, I was pulling out my phone to take pictures. Orchids don't exhibit bioluminescence. There's no evolutionary advantage, no documented cases. But there it was, glowing softly in the dim forest light like something from a fairy tale. We need to document this, I said, my scientific training kicking in. This could be a completely new species or a known species exhibiting previously unknown characteristics. We spent the next hour photographing the orchid from every angle, taking detailed notes about its location, the surrounding plant life, the environmental conditions. Kira collected samples of the insects that seemed to be attracted to it, tiny beetles and moths that clustered around the glowing petals. Look at this, she said, peering through her hand lens at one of the moths. These wing patterns. I've never seen anything like them. That evening, back at our hotel, we pored over the photos and specimens, trying to make sense of what we'd found. The orchid's glow was consistent and seemed to pulse in a regular rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. The insects we'd collected were equally mysterious, familiar, and basic structure, but with markings and behaviors that didn't match any known species. What if we found something completely new? I said, looking up from my field notes. Not just one new species, but an entire ecosystem that's evolved in isolation. That would be ... double quotes. Kira paused, searching for words. That would be the discovery of a lifetime. We spent the rest of our honeymoon returning to the site, documenting everything we could find. The glowing orchid wasn't alone. There were other plants exhibiting similar characteristics, and a whole community of insects that seemed to have co-evolved with them. But the more we studied our discovery, the more questions arose. The bioluminescence was unlike anything documented in terrestrial plants. The genetic markers we were able to analyze suggested evolutionary pathways that didn't match any known phylogenetic trees. This is going to change everything, I said on our last night in Costa Rica as we sat on our hotel balcony looking out over the forest canopy. Are you ready for that? Kira asked. I don't know, I admitted. This kind of discovery, it's going to attract attention we've never dealt with. Media, government interest, maybe even corporate interest if there are commercial applications. We'll figure it out, she said, taking my hand. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Back in Dallas, our discovery created exactly the kind of chaos I'd feared. The photos and samples we'd brought back were enough to confirm that we'd found something genuinely unprecedented, but they also raised more questions than answers. Within a week of our return, our lab was flooded with requests for interviews, collaboration proposals, and funding offers. The university's public relations department was in overdrive, trying to manage the media attention while protecting our research. Dr. Chun, said Dr. Wong during an emergency meeting, this discovery has the potential to put our institution on the map in a way we've never experienced. But it also comes with risks. We need to be very careful about how we proceed. He was right. The commercial implications alone were staggering. If we could understand the mechanism behind the bioluminescence, it could revolutionize everything, from medical imaging to sustainable lighting. But that same potential made our research a target for exploitation. We want to maintain scientific integrity, I said. This needs to be studied properly with peer review and collaborative verification. We can't let commercial interests compromise the science. I agree, said Dr. Wong. But we also need to be realistic about the pressures we're going to face. I'm assigning a legal team to help you navigate the intellectual property issues. And we're going to need to establish strict protocols for sharing information. The next few months were a blur of activity. We returned to Costa Rica multiple times, each expedition revealing new aspects of what we'd started calling the luminous ecosystem. Other research teams joined us, bringing expertise in genetics, biochemistry, and evolutionary biology. The work was exhilarating and exhausting. We were making discoveries that challenged fundamental assumptions about plant biology, insect behavior, and evolutionary relationships. But we were also dealing with constant pressure from media, investors, and institutions that wanted to claim ownership of our findings. Sometimes I miss when we were just two people who loved plants and bugs, Kira said one evening as we worked late in the lab, surrounded by data and specimens from our latest expedition. Do you regret it? I asked. The discovery, the attention, all of this? She looked up from her microscope, considering the question seriously. No, she said finally. This is what we signed up for when we became scientists. We wanted to understand the world better, to contribute to human knowledge. Sometimes that means dealing with complications we didn't expect. But I do miss the quiet moments. The times when it was just us and the work before everyone else wanted a piece of it. I understood what she meant. Our discovery had brought us recognition and opportunities we'd never dreamed of, but it had also changed the nature of our relationship with our work. We were no longer just researchers. We were public figures, representatives of a discovery that had captured the world's imagination. In the midst of all the professional chaos, we made a decision that surprised everyone, including ourselves. We decided to adopt a child. The conversation started casually, the way life-changing decisions often do. We were having breakfast on a Saturday morning when Kira mentioned that her sister had brought her kids to visit the lab the previous week. They were so fascinated by everything, she said, smiling at the memory. Little Emma kept asking if the glowing orchids were magic, and I realized I didn't have a good answer. Maybe they are magic in a way. Kids see things differently, I agreed. They don't have all the preconceptions that make adults skeptical of wonder. I keep thinking about what it would be like to raise a child who grows up understanding that the world is full of mysteries worth exploring, Kira said. Someone who sees science as an adventure rather than a chore. The idea took root slowly, the way the best ideas do. We started talking about it more often, imagining what our lives might look like with a child in them. We considered the practical challenges, our demanding careers, the travel required for our research, the unconventional nature of our work. We could make it work, I said one evening as we walked through our neighborhood. Lots of scientists have families, and we have flexible schedules, supportive colleagues, financial stability. Are you sure? Kira asked. Really sure? Because once we start this process, there's no going back. I thought about it for a moment, trying to imagine our future. I'm sure, I said. I want to share this world with someone new. I wanted to teach them to notice the small miracles, to ask questions, to be curious about everything. I want that too, she said, taking my hand. I want to raise a child who knows that love comes in all different forms, that families can be built in many ways, that being different is something to celebrate. The adoption process was more complex than either of us had anticipated. There were background checks, home visits, psychological evaluations, and endless paperwork. Some agencies were more welcoming to same-sex couples than others, and we faced several rejections before finding the right match. But 9 months later, we got the call that changed everything. We have a little girl, said Sarah, our social worker. She's 3 years old, and she's been in foster care for the past year. Her name is Rosie, and she's special. Special, it turned out, meant that Rosie had been through more trauma than any child should experience. Her biological parents had struggled with addiction, and she'd been moved between several foster homes before landing with a family that couldn't provide the stability she needed. She's incredibly bright, Sarah explained during our first meeting, but she's also wary of adults, especially new ones. She's going to need patience and consistency. When we met Rosie for the first time, she was sitting in a corner of the social services office, clutching a stuffed elephant and watching us with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. "Hi, Rosie," I said, crouching down to her level. "I'm Amelia, and this is Kira. We'd like to get to know you." She didn't respond, but she didn't back away either. "We heard you like animals," Kira said gently. "We work with plants and bugs. Would you like to see some pictures?" Rosie nodded slightly, and Kira pulled out her phone to show her photos from our research. The little girl's eyes lit up when she saw the glowing orchids. "Are they real?" she whispered. "They're real," I said. "And they're beautiful, just like you." That was the moment I knew we were meant to be a family. Bringing Rosie home was like adding a new variable to a complex equation. Everything we thought we knew about our lives had to be recalculated, reimagined, rebuilt around the needs of a traumatized 3-year-old who communicated as much through silence as through words. The first few weeks were hard. Rosie had nightmares, difficulty trusting that we would be there when she woke up, and a tendency to hoard food in her room. But she also had an incredible curiosity about the world around her, especially the natural world. "What's that?" she asked one morning, pointing to a small succulent on our kitchen windowsill. "That's a jade plant," I said. "Would you like to help me water it?" She nodded eagerly, and I showed her how to check the soil, how to pour water slowly so it wouldn't overflow. She approached the task with the same focused attention I'd seen in seasoned researchers. "It's happy now," she announced when we finished. "How do you know?" "It's standing up taller. Plants stand up when they're happy." She was right. The jade plant did look more upright after watering, and I was struck by how naturally she'd observed and interpreted what she saw. Kira was equally amazed by Rosie's intuitive understanding of the natural world. When we took her to the lab for the first time, she gravitated immediately to the insect specimens, peering into the microscope with the same wonder that had drawn us to science. "The butterfly has eyes on its wings," she said, looking up from the eyepiece. "Why, those are called eye spots," Kira explained. "They're meant to confuse predators, to make them think the butterfly is something bigger and scarier than it really is." "Like pretending?" "Exactly like pretending. Sometimes pretending keeps you safe." I saw Rosie process this information with the gravity of someone who understood the necessity of protective pretense. Our work schedules had to be completely restructured to accommodate Rosie's needs. We took turns staying home with her, arranged for childcare during travel, and found ways to include her in our research when appropriate. The lab became a second home for her, a place where she could explore and learn in a safe environment. "She's remarkable," Dr. Martinez observed one afternoon as we watched Rosie carefully examining a spider web through a magnifying glass. "She has the temperament of a natural scientist." "She does," I agreed. "But more than that, she has this way of seeing the world that's completely fresh. She asks questions that make me think about things I've taken for granted." "Like what?" "Yesterday, she asked me why flowers smell different at night. I started to explain about circadian rhythms and pollinator behavior, but then I realized I never really thought about it from a flower's perspective. What does it feel like to change your scent based on the time of day?" Dr. Martinez laughed. "It's a very different kind of scientific inquiry." "It's the best kind," I said. "The kind that remembers that science is about wonder, not just data." 6 months after Rosie came to live with us, something extraordinary happened. We were in the lab on a Saturday morning, all 3 of us, because Weekend childcare had fallen through when Rosie made an observation that changed everything. She was sitting at her small desk in the corner, drawing pictures of the specimens we'd brought back from our latest Costa Rica expedition, when she suddenly looked up. "Mama Amelia," she said. She'd started calling us Mama Amelia and Mama Kira, which made my heart melt every time. The glowing flowers are sad. I looked over at the contained specimens we'd been studying. They were healthy, thriving under our artificial growing conditions, but their bioluminescence had been dimming steadily since we'd brought them to the lab. "What makes you think they're sad?" I asked. "They're not singing anymore." Kira and I exchanged glances. "Singing?" "The light," Rosie said, as if it were obvious. "It used to dance and sing, but now just sits there." I knelt beside her desk, trying to understand what she was seeing that we'd missed. "Can you show me what you mean?" She pointed to one of the orchids. In the forest, the light went whoosh, 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 like it was talking to the bugs. But now it just glows. It's lonely. Suddenly, I understood. The bioluminescence wasn't just a static phenomenon, it was a communication system. In the wild, the plants had been pulsing in complex patterns, but in isolation, they were just existing. "Kara," I said, my voice tight with excitement, "we need to get these plants back to their natural habitat. Not permanently, but we need to observe them in their ecosystem." "Why? What are you thinking?" I think Rosie just identified something we missed. The bioluminescence isn't just light, it's language. And you can't study language by examining isolated words. The next expedition to Costa Rica was different from any we'd undertaken before. Instead of collecting specimens, we focused on observing the plants in their natural environment, documenting the patterns of light, the timing of pulses, the way different species seemed to respond to each other. What we discovered was breathtaking. The bioluminescent plants formed a communication network that extended throughout the forest, passing information about environmental conditions, predator presence, and resource availability. The insects weren't just attracted to the light, they were participants in the conversation, carrying chemical signals between plants that couldn't communicate directly. "It's like a neural network," Kira said, watching the patterns of light pulse through the forest canopy. "But instead of neurons, it's plants and insects working together to process information." "A living internet," I whispered. Our findings revolutionized understanding of plant intelligence and interspecies communication. The research papers we published were groundbreaking, but I always made sure to include a note acknowledging that the key insight had come from our 3-year-old daughter. Rosie Chandalakra, I wrote in our first Nature paper, reminded us that the most important scientific instrument is an open mind. As Rosie settled into our family, she brought out sides of both Kira and me that we'd never known existed. I discovered that I loved reading bedtime stories, making up elaborate explanations for why the sky was blue or where rain came from. Kira found that she had infinite patience for teaching Rosie to identify different types of butterflies, to understand the difference between beetles and bugs. "She's changing us," I said one evening as we watched Rosie build an elaborate fairy house in our backyard, using twigs and leaves and flower petals arranged in patterns that seemed to follow some internal logic. "How so?" "We're becoming more playful, I think. More willing to see magic in the ordinary. She's teaching us to be scientists the way children are scientists, curious about everything, unafraid of being wrong." It was true. Rosie's presence had shifted our perspective on our work. We found ourselves asking different kinds of questions, approaching problems with more creativity and less preconception. Our research became more innovative, more interdisciplinary, more willing to embrace uncertainty. But more than that, we were becoming a family in ways that surprised us. Rosie had nightmares less frequently, trusted us more completely, and began to show the kind of secure attachment that we'd been told might take years to develop. "I love you, Mama Amelia," she said one night as I tucked her into bed. "I love you too, sweetheart. And I love Mama Kira, and I love our plants, and I love the bugs, and I love our house." "That's a lot of love," I said, smoothing her hair. "There's always enough love," she said matter-of-factly. "Love isn't like food. It gets bigger when you share it." Out of the mouths of babes. 2 years after Rosie joined our family, we made a discovery that defied every law of physics we thought we understood. It happened, as these things often do, by accident. We were camping in the cloud forest where we'd first found the bioluminescent orchids, studying the long-term effects of climate change on the luminous ecosystem. Rosie was with us. She'd become our unofficial research partner, with an uncanny ability to notice details that escaped our scientifically trained eyes. It was our third night in the forest when she woke us up. "Mama Amelia, Mama Kira," she whispered, tugging on our sleeping bags. "The forest is singing." I sat up, immediately alert. The forest was never completely quiet, but the sounds I heard were different from the usual nocturnal symphony. There was a low humming, almost inaudible, that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What do you hear, sweetie?" Kira asked, pulling on her boots. "The lights are talking," Rosie said. "They're saying something important." We followed her out of our tent, and what we saw took our breath away. The entire forest was pulsing with light, not just the bioluminescent plants we'd been studying, but trees, vines, even the moss on the ground. The whole ecosystem had become a single synchronized organism of light and sound. "This is impossible," I breathed. "But it's happening," Kira said, pulling out our equipment to record what we were seeing. The pulsing intensified, and suddenly, in a small clearing about 30 feet from our campsite, the air began to shimmer. At first I thought it was heat distortion, but the night was cool and humid. Then the shimmer solidified into something that looked like liquid starlight. "It's a door," Rosie said with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children possess. "A door to what?" I asked. "To the place where the lights come from." The shimmering grew brighter, more stable, until it formed a perfect oval about 6 feet high and 4 feet wide. Through it, we could see somewhere else. Another forest, but one where the trees were silver and the sky was deep purple, where creatures that looked like living jewels flitted between branches that seemed to be made of crystallized music. "We should document this," Kira said, her scientific training warring with her amazement. "We should," I agreed, but I couldn't move. I was transfixed by the beauty of what lay beyond the portal, by the sense that we were witnessing something that changed everything we thought we knew about reality. "Can we go through?" Rosie asked. "Absolutely not," I said immediately. "We have no idea what's on the other side. No idea if it's safe, no idea if we could get back. But we have to," she said. "The lights are calling us," and they were. The humming had become a melody, complex and beautiful, and somehow familiar. Like a song we'd known all our lives, but had forgotten until this moment. The portal remained stable for exactly 17 minutes. We documented everything we could: the electromagnetic readings, the temperature fluctuations, the way the bioluminescent plants seemed to pulse in harmony with whatever energy was creating the opening. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, leaving only the normal sounds of the forest and 3 humans whose understanding of the universe had just been fundamentally shattered. "Did that really happen?" Kira asked. "We have the recordings," I said. "Whatever it was, it happened. Will it happen again?" "I don't know. But I think we need to be here if it does." We extended our stay in Costa Rica indefinitely, camping in the forest and waiting for the portal to reappear. The university was surprisingly supportive, especially after we shared our preliminary findings about the synchronized bioluminescence event. Our discovery had already revolutionized understanding of plant communication. The possibility of interdimensional phenomena was almost too much to process. Are you sure you want to stay out there? Dr. Wong asked during one of our video calls. You could set up remote monitoring equipment, observe from a safe distance. The phenomenon seems to be connected to our presence, I explained. Rosie in particular. She's the one who notices when it's about to happen. It was true. Rosie had developed an uncanny ability to predict the portal's appearances. She would become restless, agitated, claiming she could hear the forest singing, hours before the rest of us detected any unusual activity. It's like she's tuned to a frequency we can't hear, Kira observed. Or maybe she's just more open to possibilities that we've been trained to dismiss, I replied. The portal appeared 3 more times over the next month. Each time we were better prepared, gathered more data, came closer to understanding the mechanism behind its appearance. But we also became more tempted to step through. What if it's not dangerous? Kira asked one evening as we watched the shimmer form in the clearing. What if it's just somewhere else? Somewhere else in space? In time? In some other dimension entirely? The risks are enormous. But so is the potential for discovery. She was right, of course. Every fiber of my being as a scientist screamed that we had to know more, had to explore, had to push the boundaries of human understanding. That every fiber of my being as a mother screamed that we had to protect our daughter, had to be responsible, had to think beyond our own curiosity. The decision was made for us during the 4th portal event. We were documenting the energy readings when Rosie suddenly broke away from us and ran toward the shimmering opening. Rosie, no, I shouted, but she was already at the threshold. She didn't step through. Instead, she pressed her small hand against the surface of the portal, and something extraordinary happened. The shimmer solidified, becoming clearer, more stable, and through it stepped a figure that made my heart stop. It was a woman, tall and elegant, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold the light of stars. She was wearing clothes that looked like they were woven from moonbeams and carrying what appeared to be a living plant that pulsed with the same bioluminescence we'd been studying. Hello, she said, her voice melodious and somehow familiar. I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez. I believe you've been studying my work. Your work? I managed. The bioluminescent communication network, the interdimensional botanical project. I've been watching your research with great interest. She stepped fully through the portal and it remained stable behind her. I think it's time you understood what you've really discovered. Dr. Elena Vasquez, it turned out, was a version of myself from a parallel universe where the barriers between dimensions had been broken decades ago. In her world, scientists had learned to cultivate plants that could communicate across-dimensional boundaries, creating a network of knowledge and experience that spanned multiple realities. Every universe has its own version of the discovery, she explained as we sat around our campfire, the portal shimmering peacefully behind her. But few have researchers with the intuition to understand what they're truly seeing. And Rosie? I asked, watching our daughter play with the living plant Elena had brought, a creature that seemed to be part vegetation, part light, part pure curiosity. Children are naturally more open to interdimensional phenomena, Elena said. They haven't been trained to dismiss possibilities that don't fit into established paradigms. In my universe, we've learned to value that openness. Are there other versions of us? Kira asked. Other versions of our family? Infinite versions? Elena said. In some universes you never met. In others, you're famous botanists who revolutionized conservation biology. In a few, you're space explorers who discovered life on other planets. But in all the universes where you're together, you're happy. Why are you here? I asked. Why show us this? Because your universe is at a crossroads, she said. The climate crisis, the biodiversity loss, the social and political upheavals, they're reaching a tipping point. That the discovery you've made, the communication network you've identified, it could change everything. She gestured to the portal. This network doesn't just connect plants within your world. It connects plants across dimensions. Imagine being able to share conservation strategies across multiple realities, to learn from universes where different choices were made. I paused, trying to grasp the implications. That's beyond anything we imagined. The question, Elena said, is whether you're ready to take the next step, to become ambassadors between worlds, to help establish connections that could save not just your universe, but all of them. I looked at Kira, saw the same mixture of wonder and uncertainty in her eyes that I was feeling. Then I looked at Rosie, who was giggling as the interdimensional plant created patterns of light around her fingers. What would that mean for our family? I asked. It would mean adventure, Elena said. It would mean responsibility. It would mean raising your daughter to understand that the universe is bigger and more wonderful than anyone imagined. And more dangerous? Everything important is dangerous, she said gently. The question isn't whether there are risks, but whether the potential rewards justify taking them. We spent 3 days discussing Elena's proposal. She remained patient, answering our questions, sharing stories of her universe, helping us understand what we'd be committing to if we agreed to become interdimensional ambassadors. You wouldn't be leaving your world, she explained. You'd be expanding it, creating bridges between realities, facilitating communication and collaboration across dimensional boundaries. But our research here, I said, our life, our community, our responsibilities, all of that would continue. But it would be enhanced by knowledge and perspectives from other universes. Imagine studying conservation strategies that worked in universes where humans made different choices. Imagine learning from versions of yourself who solved problems you're still struggling with. It was tempting. More than tempting, it was the opportunity of multiple lifetimes. But it was also overwhelming. I need to think about Rosie, I said. What kind of life we'd be giving her? A life full of wonder, Elena said. A life where she grows up understanding that there are always more possibilities than we can imagine. A life where she never quite fits into any single reality, Kira added. Perhaps, but would that be so different from the life she's already living? She's already a child who sees things others miss, who asks questions that challenge fundamental assumptions. In my universe, children like her are treasured as bridges between worlds. That night, after Elena had returned to her universe to give us space to decide, we lay in our tent listening to the sounds of the forest and trying to imagine our future. What do you think? I asked Kira. I think I'm terrified, she said, but I'm also more excited than I've ever been. This is what we've been working toward our whole lives, isn't it? The chance to expand human understanding, to contribute to something bigger than ourselves. And Rosie, she's already adopted. To one impossible situation, being adopted by 2 women who study glowing plants in the middle of the forest. I think she could adapt to this too. Are you sure? No, but I'm sure that if we don't take this chance, we'll regret it for the rest of our lives. I knew she was right. This was our moment, our opportunity to step into a larger universe. But it was also our chance to give Rosie something precious, a childhood filled with magic, wonder, and the understanding that love and curiosity could overcome any obstacle. Let's do it, I said. The morning we stepped through the portal for the first time, holding Rosie's hands between us, I felt like I was being born again. The sensation was indescribable, like falling upward, like being dissolved and reformed, like becoming part of something vast and beautiful and utterly alien. We emerged into Elena's universe in a laboratory that looked like a cross between a botanical garden and a spaceship. Plants grew in impossible configurations, their roots suspended in crystalline chambers filled with liquid light. Insects the size of hummingbirds flitted between workstations, carrying messages and samples in tiny pouches attached to their backs. "Welcome," Elena said, "to the Interdimensional Botanical Institute." The next few hours were a blur of introductions, explanations, and demonstrations. We met researchers from dozens of different universes, each bringing their own perspective and expertise to the collective project of understanding and preserving life across dimensions. In Universe 7A, explained Dr. Kim Santos, a version of someone who might have been my graduate school advisor, we developed plants that could photosynthesize.